guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to be doing a battle of the eyeshadow palettes, and we are going to be battling my first half of 2023 ranking of those eyeshadow palettes that I had tested versus the latter half. I saw this video done by Lady Katie or Katie Marie here on YouTube, so I'll have her channel and her videos linked down below. I believe she's done it a couple of years, and the only difference between mine and hers is when I did my end of the year ranking, I ranked like the palettes that I had ranked the first half of the year also ended up in my second half of the year ranking. So the way that I had to like split these palettes up was a little bit interesting. But it should for the most part land with like my lowest ranked first half of the year palettes end up against my like lower ranked palettes that I tried the second half of the year. But some of my palettes that I was trying in like July and August trickled into like the first half of the year so that I could have equal palettes to rank, equal number of palettes to rank. I have 23 palettes to rank. And I would love to know in the comments below, do you think the first half of 2023 is gonna win or the second half? As I look at my palettes sitting in front of me, I definitely feel more excited about one half than the other, but I'd be really interested to see as we go like palette for palette, even like the stack of palettes. I should take a picture so you guys can see. Okay, I'll post it on the screen. The front stack, like the one closer, is the first half of the year, and then the farther stack is the latter half of the year. I just feel like the latter half looks a little bit more fun. But if you guys are interested in seeing who actually wins the palette battle, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project painting content, palette themed content, or just chatting about makeup, I'd love if you'd consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's jump into the video. Okay, you guys, in my left hand, I'm going to hold first half of the year, and in my right hand, I'm gonna hold second half of the year. So starting at the bottom, but like just starting, here we go. What am I saying? Okay, so first half of the year, we have the Lawless, the Lavender One eyeshadow palette. I really did not like this palette at all. This is gonna be hard to hold because I talk with my hands so much. It's gonna be very difficult. Okay, so we have the Lawless Lavender One, and then we have the Natasha Denona Xenon palette. I really had no business buying this Xenon palette because these are just not shades that I reach for every single day. And I was so excited to purchase the Lawless, the Lavender One eyeshadow palette because lavender is like one of my favorite eyeshadows, and I really have liked the smaller Lawless eyeshadow palettes for the most part, but this was absolutely terrible. One of the worst palettes I've tried in the last few years. And while I don't reach for this one very frequently, I do still think this palette is beautiful, specifically like the shimmer shades in this palette. So I'm gonna have to give it to the Natasha Denona Xenon. Just looking at these palettes, color story, it would go to Lawless, the Lavender One, but quality was not good on that one. So we're gonna have to give it to the Xenon palette for round number one. Okay, I've decluttered the Charlotte Tilbury, I think it was Darling Eyes, which would be this palette over here. And then over here we have the Glaminatrix Nearly Nocturnal palette, which looks, I almost like just held up this hand like this, which looks like this. It is definitely going to the Glaminatrix Nearly Nocturnal palette. This is so much more of a fun color story. I think the Charlotte Tilbury eyeshadow palette is extremely overpriced for what it is. Obviously I decluttered that one, I still have this one. And while the mattes, some of the mattes, it's so tricky. I need to pull this palette back out and play around with it. Some of the looks that I did with this, I feel like I was trying to blend matte shades that just like had no business being blended together. Like, I can't remember what I tried to do. Something very interesting and outside of my comfort zone. So I want to play around with this palette a little bit more. I absolutely love the shimmer shades. Glaminatrix makes such a smooth, buttery, special shade. It was really just some of the matte shades in this palette I didn't feel like blended the best together. But again, I feel like I was trying to mix colors together that just like weren't meant to be mixed. Regardless, this is something I would still reach for any day over the Charlotte Tilbury Darling Eyes palette. So I'm gonna have to give it to second half of the year for this round as well. Okay, another palette from the first half of the year that I've decluttered was my LH Cosmetics Daybreak palette, and that is going up against the Glaminatrix Cosmetics Fairy Lights palette. This is an all shimmer palette, so 6 shimmers, and the LH Cosmetics palette was a 9-pan eyeshadow palette. The color story of that one just like when I had it in my hands in person, it wasn't my favorite. I feel like I was really interested in that palette for the blue brown shade, and it was nothing special in my opinion. So I ended up obviously decluttering that. This I do really like. Obviously it's going to be a companion palette, at least for me, being that it is an all shimmer palette. But these are really intense metallics on the eyes, and they're really beautiful. So again, I'm gonna have to give it to the second half of the year. Okay, and then I think this is my last. It seems as though most of my decluttered palettes all came from the first half of the year. But first half of the year, I have the Colourpop Alice in Wonderland palette, and that is going up against the Huda Beauty Grunge palette. I'm gonna have to give it to the second half of the year. I really like the Huda Grunge palette. I will say it's not my favorite large Huda palette that she's ever come out with. I feel like for the most part, you kind of end up getting pretty similar eye looks, although I haven't played around with this palette the absolute most to try and do different things with this. I definitely feel like this fits the palette aesthetic that seemed to be very popular in 2023, being that it is a more cool toned eyeshadow palette. And the Colourpop Alice in Wonderland palette, I just didn't really know what to do with that color story. I wasn't super impressed with the pink Super Shock shadow at the bottom, and overall I just like never felt inspired to reach for that eyeshadow palette, whereas this I definitely will still get more use out of. I also still have this one in my collection. So second half of the year wins again. Okay, this is really interesting. We have Scooby-Doo Ruh-Roh Reggae. This is actually on my eyes today, going up against Scooby-Doo 2. Both of them from Glamlight. So they're collab number 1 versus collab number 2. This released in 2022, but I didn't try it until 2023. And then this one obviously released in, oh goodness, 2023. So this one obviously is a chunkier monkey. It has way more shades, and I don't always love a larger eyeshadow palette. But that being said, I have been no pan left behinding this eyeshadow palette, and these two like blue matte shades I'm really unimpressed with. I think they're really difficult to work with. I also just, I like, let me just put this down for a second. I like these 6 shades. I could do without this quad of shades. I'm trying to decide whether or not I want to keep this eyeshadow palette. This is something that I might end up decluttering. I really love the looks that I get with the greens, and I also love Scooby-Doo. So there's a bit of like nostalgia tied to this eyeshadow palette that like I do really enjoy. However, I just don't get excited really to reach for this, and I feel like if I were to swatch some of these greens with other greens in my collection, I would find similar shades. And then we have this, what is this, a 25 pan eyeshadow palette? 2, 4, 5, 2, 4, 5. Yes, 25 pan eyeshadow palette. You get a lot more variety in here, a lot more colors. I love Glamlight's metallic formula, so I do really enjoy this palette for the metallics. The blue, like the blue row, I absolutely love and adore. The purples are really fun as well. I did a look that I really liked with this row. I will say this is not the best red I've ever used. Not that I use red that frequently, but I do feel like I really had to build this, and it kept kind of like dusting away into nothing. But overall, I do really enjoy the color story. I know it's a larger palette, but it's a fun one to have in the collection, and again, I'm gonna have to give it to the second half of the year. So what if it's like a total sweep? I feel like kind of embarrassed for the first half of the year. What was happening? Okay, first half of the year, we have Colourpop Sage the Day. I was so excited for this eyeshadow palette, and then highly disappointed. And then for second half of the year, we have the Glaminatrix Sugar and Spice. I will say I popped out a couple of the shades from the Glaminatrix Sugar and Spice and popped in a couple of shades from a Colourpop eyeshadow palette. The smaller pans for Colourpop do pop into the Glaminatrix Sugar and Spice, and I wasn't a huge fan of the matte color story with the Glaminatrix palette, but now that I have a couple of warm shades mixed in, I feel like it works a lot better for me. I do really enjoy the metallic special duochrome, triochrome shades within this palette. There's some chunky metallics in here as well. It's really the color story of this one I just don't know what to do with. And then we have the Colourpop Sage the Day palette, which I love the color story. I think it's absolutely beautiful, but this was not the top tier Colourpop quality that I was hoping that it would be. Really disappointed in their blue round shade, as it seems I always am with Colourpop. And just overall, I wasn't a huge fan of this. Mostly the shimmers and metallics I was really let down by. I actually did like the majority of the mattes in this eyeshadow palette. Regardless, I did decide to declutter this one as well. I just still have this one sitting around. to share with someone else. But I am gonna have to also give this to the second half of the year. It's gonna go to Glaminatrix Sugar and Spice, mostly because I really, like, I love the shade Basil down here, and I love the metallics and special shades within this eyeshadow palette, whereas the quality in this one was just really disappointing. So it's a total sweep for the second half of the year so far. Okay, you guys, this just like actually seems so unfair. Okay. For the first half of the year, we have, this is one of the ones I kind of had to like slot in to the first half of the year, but I actually tried Mini Starlet's second half of the year. Anyway, this is gonna be first half of the year battle versus the Desert Monsoon palette from What's Up Beauty. And it's really no question. There's only 5 shades in here. There's 12 shades in here, and the color story in this one is just so much better. I love the metallics. The What's Up Beauty metallics are really, really beautiful. This blue shade is so pretty as a nail polish as well as on the eyes. I also love the shade Humidity for like a light, kind of like dusty pink, silvery sort of shade. I think it's beautiful. Sun is a really beautiful green metallic with a bit of a gold shift, which I love. We have Succulent, which is a really, really beautiful purple. This is just a stunning palette. I also love the neutral mattes in here. And then we have the Natasha Denona Mini Starlet, which is 5 shades that they've already done just in one palette. I should have done more research to realize that. I'm just not inspired by this color story. This is something I could also see myself decluttering. I keep this around because I do really love the shade Galaxia, although I do have that in the Natasha Denona Mini Retro palette, which I love. So it's possible you could see this decluttered as well this year. That being said, we're giving it to Desert Monsoon. Okay. This also seems a little unfair because I literally have, I like ranked each of my Kaja stacks, and like these are a 3-pan eyeshadow palette versus what's going to be like an eyeshadow palette. So I think you know where this is going. This is supposed to actually be the Coral whatever stack. I just put this in here to remind me. This is the Glowing Guava one, but it actually was the Coral stack that I reviewed last year. My daughter took mine and I cannot find it, but it would be the Coral stack versus the Adept Cosmetics Minka palette. This did release prior to 2023, but I tried it in 2023. It's obviously going to go to Adept Minka. This is a really, really beautiful, very textured, molten sort of metallic palette. Beautiful if you have like a special occasion that you want just like the most beautiful metallic on your eyes. So it's going to the second half of the year. Then we have the Kaja Forest Night Stack slotted for the first half of the year palette. Again, I feel like this is a little unfair, and it's going up against the Lethal Cosmetics Wildflower palette, which is an absolutely stunning, very special palette. It's definitely going to Lethal Wildflower. I love this color story. I think it's so fun. I love that you have equal parts matte, right? Yeah, equal parts matte to equal parts shimmer. They have some really, really beautiful duo and trio chromes in this palette. I love this palette. So second half of the year takes the cake again. And then we have the Peach Madeline stack versus the Flora Story palette from Odin's Eye. I promise as we get like up towards the top of the first half of the year, like we have more competition at least. I will say I love the Peach Madeline stack. I think it is absolutely beautiful for a like lighter peachy toned eyeshadow look. I do really like it. But then we have the Flora Story palette, which is a mixture of purples and greens. And I just think this is such a stunning eyeshadow palette. I absolutely love all of the metallic slash shimmer shades in this palette. The shade Dawn is such a beautiful, like shifty, it's such a beautiful inner corner highlight. Honestly, I could have used that on the inner corner today and that would have been so pretty. I only really had issues with, I think it was the shade Sage blending, and not issues, it just took a little bit more effort. Beautiful palette against a beautiful trio, but it's gonna go to the Flora Story. Okay, up next we have the Aether Beauty Summer Solstice palette for the first half of the year, which my sister gave to me. So obviously this released before last year, but I tried it for the first time last year. And I have it going up against the Menagerie Killer Purr eyeshadow palette. Both of these I really, really like. I think the Aether Beauty is just such an easy reach. especially for just like warm tones, like a very beautiful, it's giving like like I can see like a model in the desert with like, I can see it like maybe a fragrance commercial with just like a really beautiful, warm, sultry, smoky eye. And I feel like you could easily get that from this Aether Beauty Summer Solstice palette. I feel like this is a staple in anyone's, could really be a staple in anyone's collection. But then you have the Menagerie Colourpop palette, and I do really, really love this one. I especially love Lioness and Main. Main is this really beautiful, shifty, duochrome pink shade. One of my shades fell out and broke. Oh, this is so tough, actually. Because I feel like it's more easy to create an everyday look with this eyeshadow palette, while this one would be more of a fun eyeshadow palette. But I feel like it's missing, and it's probably because it's missing the shade right here. It's missing one shade to just make like an easy, quick, simple look. Oh, I'm actually really struggling with this. I still think I'm gonna give it to Menagerie Pastel Pop, because if someone asked me like you can only keep one of these two, I would say the Colourpop. So it's also going to the second half of the year. First half of the year hasn't won once yet. Okay, next up, first half of the year, we have the Moira Fun is in the Air eyeshadow palette. This is such a fun one, especially for some pops of like bright neons. And then we have the Nomad Ghost Tone eyeshadow palette, which is also really beautiful. Again, really kind of fit the aesthetic of 2023, being that it's like a grungier, more cool toned eyeshadow palette. It's definitely like going to Nomad Ghost Town. sorry to the first half of the year again. While I do really love this eyeshadow palette for a couple of the neon mattes, the color story, I just overall don't know what to do with. I love to reach into this for a pop of neon on the inner corner, and that's really what I keep this palette around for. I don't think that the metallics are anything to write home about. I think they're actually quite lackluster within this eyeshadow palette. And if it wasn't for the neon, like the neon yellow, blue, and orange in this palette, I really would declutter it. So it's gonna go to Nomad Ghost Town. All right, next up we have the Mini Pastel palette from Natasha Denona up against the Rowan Mood Forever quad. I'm so sorry, but at least these are like smaller palettes going up against each other. It's gonna have to go to the second half of the year. I absolutely adore my Rowan quads, you guys know. I've been reaching for this Mood Forever quad so much this first half of the year, and just loving some of the looks that I created. Even though it's only 4 shades, these cream shadows really pop on the eyes and just really add a special punch. I think the Mini Pastel is a really beautiful companion palette. I really like all the shades. I see that mine seems to like, some of my shades need a little bit of pressing in here. I really like this greeny gold shade up top. I honestly really like all of these shades quite a bit, but it's more of a companion palette to me, whereas this, I use it as a companion palette quite frequently, but also I like this on its own. And I just really think that the Rowan quads are something special, so I'm sorry I have to give it to the second half of the year again. Okay, I honestly don't even know at this point if first half of the year won out, if it could even win at this point, but we're gonna keep rolling. First half of the year, we have the Sea Talk palette from Odin's Eye in collaboration with Lauren May Beauty up against the Nomad Cosmetics Okavango Safari palette, which looks like this. Both are really beautiful, both are really fun. Both of them had like just a shade that like just didn't work the best for me. Specifically, like I think the marbled shades in the Nomad palette, like I like the idea, but it doesn't necessarily translate onto the eyes. I also think that, I don't know if Nomad just has like extremely firmly pressed shadows. They can feel quite dry to the touch. I've still created looks that I love with this eyeshadow palette, and the formula is pretty long lasting on the eyes. And then within the Sea Talk palette, Night Swim just gave me a little bit of trouble. But you guys, I think we're gonna have our first half of the year winner. I do really like this. Like this is actually really tough because I like that this is like a grungier warm tone palette with a pop of green. But I also really enjoy this palette because there's the shade Electric Kelp, which is such a fun bright pop of yellow. I also really like Iridescent Shell. It looks hot pink in the pan, but it actually is more of like an iridescent kind of pink on the eyes. And I love the blues. I love the teal shade up here. And I did a really beautiful kind of like satin taupey look that I loved last year. So I am going to finally finally give it to a first half of the year palette, and Sea Talk is gonna win out over the Nomad palette. All right, you guys, next up we have two Natasha palettes that are kind of similar up against one another. So for the first half of the year, we have the Natasha Denona Glam eyeshadow palette. Up against second half of the year, we have the I Need a Nude eyeshadow palette. I feel like my initial instinct is to go for I Need a Nude, but I've recently been no pan left behinding the Glam palette and have really been enjoying it. I like both. I will say this has a little bit more warmth to it than I Need a Nude, but I Need a Nude has more like texture and like finish differentiations in the metallic formula. Oh, this is so tough. Oh, this is actually so tough. Oh my gosh, I'm actually struggling. Okay. It's almost like I wish I could combine these two together to create like my perfect eyeshadow palette. I really could do without the two rosy shades in this eyeshadow palette, but then within this eyeshadow palette, there's just like something, there's one more like matte shade that I want in this eyeshadow palette. But I do love like the pop of warm. Oh, I feel like I want to give it to this, but it's like making me feel guilty because I've actually ranked this higher. Maybe it's just, oh my gosh, you guys, I'm struggling so much. I do though. I love like I actually am going to give it to I Need a Nude. I love both of them. Both of them serve a purpose to me, but I will say days that I'm wanting like a companion palette to create like a neutral look, because that's typically what I'm wanting, I have like wanted to reach for this one over Glam. I think both are beautiful, and again, I kind of wish I could like combine both of them together to create like my absolute perfect everyday neutral palette, which I can do that, I just haven't. I'm gonna give it to second half of the year I Need a Nude, but I also really enjoyed this one. That was a tough one. That was tough. Next up, first half of the year, we have the LH Cosmetics Shimmer Saga Quad up against the What's Up Beauty Dragon Eye palette. This is an all shimmer quad. This is 12 really beautiful shades. I'm so sorry, it's gonna have to go to the second half of the year. Clearly I tried so many more. I will say I really got into indie shadows towards the end of 2023, so like that's part of it. This is just an absolutely stunning palette. Mattes work really well. Shimmers, there's such a fun, interesting like array of shimmer shades in this palette. It's absolutely beautiful. So we're gonna give it to second half of the year. Okay, next up we have first half of the year, NARS Rising Orgasm versus second half of the year, we have the Glaminatrix Rich Romantic eyeshadow palette. We all know how much I love the NARS eyeshadow formula, but it's tough because there's so many special shades within this Rich Romantic. And if someone asked me, like I could only keep one, I probably would keep this simply because this NARS does over and over, and I basically have this eyeshadow palette within my Summer Solstice palette, but I do still really love this palette. But this is such a fun color story. The only thing I will say is I feel like there's something like why do we have all warm mattes with the exception of like these two cool tones? Like I honestly wish we could maybe trade out one of the purples for like one more lighter, even lighter like brown shade. But I love this peach shade. I actually really like the shade Intoxicating up here, and I love all of the special shades. Like there are some exceptionally special shades, although I will say a lot of them kind of have a green flipped to them, and I wish we could have done maybe one less green flippy shade. Still, I'm so sorry. I have to give it to second half of the year. So first half of the year is still only sitting at 1. Okay, next up, first half of the year, we have the Adept Heather Austin eyeshadow palette versus second half of the year, we have, oops, I grabbed the wrong one, versus the ABH Cosmos palette. Now this is a really, really tough battle because obviously Adept just makes such a beautiful formula, and I love all of the uniqueness and the specialness that comes along with their like shimmer metallic duochrome shades. Then we have the ABH Cosmos palette, which I know was not necessarily well received by everybody, but it has always worked extremely well for me. And I love this one because there's beautiful neutral matte shades, but then these really fun pops of shimmer that really work well. And I've created some looks that I absolutely love with this eyeshadow palette. But I do feel like if someone asked me like which one would you keep, I would keep Adept Heather Austin just because it's a little bit more special. Like the special shades in here don't compare to the special shades in here. So we're gonna give it to the first half of the year, and we're giving it to Adept Heather Austin. I am so proud of the first half of the year for winning around. Next up, we have first half of the year, the Pat McGrath, I believe this is the Subliminal eyeshadow palette, versus, oh my gosh, can I open this? Second half of the year, we have It's Belle's Cosmetics, the Flare eyeshadow palette. This is what this one looks like, a really, really, really beautiful all shimmer eyeshadow palette versus what looks like a very, very, very boring neutral eyeshadow palette. And I actually think the way that these ranked, because this was one that I ranked at, well, obviously I ranked all these at the end of the year. This, I believe, ranked below this. But looking at these two, I actually think I'm gonna go with first half of the year Subliminal, because I love every single look that I create with this eyeshadow palette. This is a look, or this is a palette that I feel like I kind of reach for anytime I'm creating like a blue look and I want just a little something extra, because I'll reach into this shade just to top it off. So I really love having the palette for that reason. And this is obviously just a companion palette for me. Yes, they're beautiful, beautiful shades, but I can create full looks with this eyeshadow palette. So I'm actually in this battle going to give it to Pat McGrath Subliminal. So that means the first half of the year wins another round. Okay, next up we have the Odin's Eye Planet Spirit eyeshadow palette versus the Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 4. I almost feel like this isn't a fair battle because we know how much I love the Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 5 eyeshadow palettes, but I will say I really loved some of the looks that I created with this eyeshadow palette, and I still think this is a really lovely palette. Like if someone told me I could only keep one, I would keep this one, but there's part of me that's like wanting to pick this one. Because I have created just like a full look using this eyeshadow palette, where this really is like a companion palette, but I do love my Danessa Myricks. I have to give it to Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 5. It would just feel wrong and ingenuine if I didn't. Really beautiful eyeshadow palette, but I do still also really love that Planet Spirit palette from Odin's Eye. Okay, next up, first half of the year, we have the Colourpop Muppets palette versus second half of the year, we have the Natasha Denona Yucca palette. This is so tough. This is definitely more like fun, bright, and colorful, and I've definitely created looks I love with this, whereas this is obviously more of like a grungy safari. I have to give it to Yucca. I'm looking up at the shade Plantasia up here and I'm just like, no, I can't. I absolutely love this eyeshadow palette. And while I would be really sad if this was no longer in my collection, I believe I would be more sad if this wasn't, just because I'm like, this is just like yummy to look at. So it's going to the second half of the year. It's going to the Yucca palette. Okay, we're down to the last two. So first half of the year, we have the Pat McGrath Moonlit Seduction versus the Unearthly Fall Magic palette. Oh my gosh, this is just so unfair to the first half of the year. Although I will say I do really love this eyeshadow palette. It's now my favorite Pat McGrath palette. But Unearthly just makes such a special metallic shade. Like their duochrome shades are just absolutely gorgeous. Oh, but this would definitely be like a more colorful, whereas this would be like, this has like my favorite blue brown. Am I gonna actually have to give it to, I might actually have to give it to, I think I actually might have to give it to Pat McGrath Bronze Seduction, just because this is a palette I reach for definitely more frequently. I even reach into this like to finish a look off, whereas this I really love, but there's a time and a place that I would be reaching for the Pat McGrath, or not the Pat McGrath, the Unearthly Fall Magic palette. I feel like from day to day I would reach for this one more often than this. So I actually, and maybe it's because I'm feeling a little bit bad for the first half of the year, I'm gonna have to give it to first half of the year with the Pat McGrath Moonlit Seduction palette. Okay, and then I think you all know what's gonna happen with this last battle. But for the first half of the year, we have the Too Faced Italian Spritz palette versus second half of the year, the Glaminatrix Nearly Natural palette. This is like one of my tippity top favorite palettes in my collection. Granted, I did love this eyeshadow palette last year. I thought Too Faced actually did something really unlike them, and this was like a little bit more, it's like a little bit more colorful than I feel like they typically do, and I really enjoyed the formula. I loved some of the looks that I created, but I just adore this palette and could not live without it. The mattes are more buildable, which is something that works really well for me in the way that I like to do my makeup, and the metallics are so punchy on the eye. They are not buildable. They're just like, you gloss your finger over and like bam, that's on your eyes. So it's gonna have to go to Gliminatrix for second half of the year. And so that means when we add up the final total, first half of the year ended up with 4 wins. Second half of the year ended up with 19 wins. So definitely we tried a lot better things the second half of 2023. I will say, as 2024 has begun, I have tried quite a few eyeshadow palettes that I am so impressed with. Like, I'm like, these, I love all of them. I'm trying to put together like ranking the last like 10 palettes I've tried, and I'm like, how do I even rank these? Because I really think they're all so impressive. So I'll be really interested to do this again at the end of 2024. But yeah, no question, no contest. It definitely goes to the latter half of the year for 2023. That is gonna wrap it up for today's video. Thank you guys so much for sticking around to watch and for supporting me and my channel as you guys always do. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye.